In the shadowed halls of verdant hall, a scream pierces the night, and a quiet spinster lies dead, a bronze statuette stained with her blood. Who among the glittering guests each hiding secrets of greed, betrayal, and forbidden love wielded the fatal blow? Why was an unassuming woman like Beatrice Lyle marked for murder? And what dark truth lies hidden in the letters she uncovered, threatening to unravel a fortune? Join Miss Jane Marple, with her unerring eye for human nature, and the brilliant Hercule Poirot, as they unravel a web of lies in a classic tale of deception, where every clue counts and no one is what they seem. Will you spot the truth before the final, shocking reveal? Chapter 1. The gathering at verdant hall in the drowsy haze of an English summer. The village of St. Mary Mead seemed to slumber beneath a quilt of green hills and golden sunlight. Verdant Hall, a sprawling Georgian manor on the outskirts, stood as a monument to old wealth, its ivy-clad walls whispering of secrets long buried. It was here, in the waning days of August, that Lady Eleanor Ashby had summoned a curious assembly of guests, ostensibly for a weekend of bridge, conversation, and the unveiling of her late husband's will. The air was thick with anticipation, though none could predict the shadow that would soon fall over the gathering. Miss Jane Marple, that unassuming spinster of St. Mary Mead, had not been among the invited. Her presence at Verdant Hall came by way of a fortuitous coincidence, or so it seemed. Her old friend, Mrs. Clara Bantry, had been invited and, feeling unequal to the grandeur of the occasion, had pleaded with Miss Marple to accompany her. "It's all very well, Jane," Mrs. Bantry had said, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "but I suspect there'll be more at stake than bridge scores. You've a knack for seeing through people, and I'd feel better with you there." Miss Marple, with her soft gray hair and deceptively mild blue eyes, had demurred at first. "I am no sleuth, Clara," she had said, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "I merely observe." But curiosity, that quiet engine of her mind, had won out, and so, on a Friday afternoon, she arrived at Verdant Hall, her modest suitcase in hand, her senses alert to the undercurrents of human nature. The drawing room of Verdant Hall was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across polished mahogany, and portraits of stern-faced Ashbys glared down from gilded frames. Lady Eleanor, a tall woman of 50 with a hawk-like nose and a penchant for emerald silk, presided over the gathering with the air of a queen. Her guests, an eclectic mix, sipped tea and exchanged polite banalities, though Miss Marple noted the faint strain in their smiles. There was Roger Ashby, Lady Eleanor's nephew, a handsome man of 30 with a restless energy and a habit of tugging at his cufflinks. His wife, Sylvia, a former actress with a cascade of auburn hair, seemed ill at ease, her laughter too bright, her glances too frequent toward her husband. Then there was Dr. Henry Vaughan, a retired physician whose quiet demeanor belied a sharp gaze that missed nothing. Beside him sat Miss Beatrice Lyle, a spinster of indeterminate age, her pinched lips and nervous hands suggesting a life of suppressed desires. The group was rounded out by Mr. Lionel Trent, a solicitor with a penchant for pomposity, and his young clerk, Peter Grayson, whose boyish charm did little to mask his ambition. The conversation turned, as it often did in such circles, to the late Sir Reginald Ashby, whose fortune had built Verdant Hall, and whose death 6 months prior had left a void, filled with whispers of inheritance. "A great man," Mr. Trent declared, adjusting his spectacles. "His will, to be read tomorrow, will no doubt reflect his wisdom." "Wisdom?" Roger Ashby snorted, his voice edged with bitterness. "He was a tyrant, and you know it, Trent. Half the county despised him." "Roger, please," Sylvia murmured, her hand brushing his arm. But the room had grown still, the weight of Roger's words hanging like damp fog. Miss Marple, seated in a corner with her knitting, said nothing. She observed the flicker of unease in Lady Eleanor's eyes, the way Dr. Vaughan's fingers tightened around his teacup, the sudden flush on Miss Lyle's cheeks. People, she thought, were never so revealing as when they believed themselves unobserved. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, the long table gleaming with silver and candlelight. The conversation flowed smoothly, though Miss Marple noted the careful avoidance of Sir Reginald's name. Afterward, the party retired to the library, where Lady Eleanor proposed a game of bridge. The clock struck 9, its chimes echoing through the high-ceilinged room, when a scream shattered the air that it came from the conservatory. A glass-walled haven filled with exotic plants and the scent of damp earth. The guests rushed toward the sound, Miss Marple following at a measured pace, her eyes scanning the scene. There, sprawled among the ferns, lay Miss Beatrice Lyle, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. A thin trickle of blood seeped from a wound at her temple, and a heavy bronze statuette lay beside her, its base stained crimson. "Good heavens!" Mrs. Bantry gasped, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "She's dead." Dr. Vaughan knelt beside the body, his fingers probing for a pulse. "She's gone," he said gravely. "Struck, I'd wager, not more than 10 minutes ago." Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the murmurs. "This is monstrous. We must call the police at once." Miss Marple, standing quietly by a potted palm, took in the scene: the statuette, the shattered glass of a nearby window, the faint smudge of mud on the floor. Her eyes moved to the guests, their faces a tableau of shock, fear, and perhaps guilt. "A tragedy," she murmured, almost to herself, "but not, I think, an accident." As the distant wail of a police siren approached, Miss Marple's mind began to turn, her little gray cells stirring. Verdant Hall, so serene in the afternoon light, had become a stage for murder, and she, Jane Marple, would watch and listen for the truth. She knew lay in the smallest of details. Chapter 2. The shadow of the Crimith Conservatory at Verdant Hall, so lately a haven of verdant calm, had transformed into a grim theater of death. The police arrived swiftly, their boots clattering on the polished floors, bringing with them an air of brusque efficiency that clashed with the manor's elegance. Inspector Hargreaves, a stout man with a walrus mustache and a penchant for barking orders, took charge, cordoning off the conservatory and herding the shaken guests back to the library. Miss Jane Marple, unobtrusive as ever, settled into a high-backed chair, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes missing nothing. The library was a cavern of oak and leather, its shelves heavy with volumes that spoke of the Ashby family's long history. The guests sat in uneasy silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. Lady Eleanor stood by the hearth, her emerald gown catching the glow, her composure strained but intact. Roger Ashby paced near the window, his hands thrust deep into his pockets, while Sylvia, his wife, sat rigid, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Dr. Henry Vaughan leaned against a bookcase, his expression unreadable, and Mr. Lionel Trent, the solicitor, mopped his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. Young Peter Grayson, the clerk, hovered near his employer, his boyish face pale but alert. Inspector Hargreaves entered, notebook in hand, his eyes sweeping the room. "Right, then," he said, his voice gruff. "Miss Beatrice Lyle, struck dead. Not an hour ago. I'll need statements from each of you where you were, what you saw, what you heard." No one leaves this house until we've got to the bottom of this. Mrs. Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, whispered, "He's rather forceful, isn't he, Jane? But I dare say he'll miss something. Policemen always do." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. "They are thorough, Clara, but they lack imagination. The truth often hides in what is not said." Her eyes drifted to the group, noting the subtle shifts. Sylvia's quick glance at Roger, Trent's nervous adjustment of his spectacles, Vaughn's stillness, as if he were a statue carved from granite. The inspector began his interrogations with Lady Eleanor. "You were hosting this gathering, Lady Ashby. Tell me about Miss Lyle. Any enemies? Any reason someone might want her dead?" Lady Eleanor's chin lifted. "Beatrice was a harmless creature, Inspector. A spinster, quiet, devoted to her needlework and her charities. I invited her out of kindness. She was a distant cousin of my late husband's. I cannot imagine why anyone would harm her. And yet," Hargreaves pressed, "someone did." "Where were you at 9 o'clock?" "In the library, overseeing the bridge tables," Lady Eleanor replied. "We all were, until that dreadful scream." The others nodded, their alibis aligning. With disconcerting ease, Roger claimed he'd been fetching a drink from the sideboard. Sylvia said she'd been adjusting her shawl by the fire. Dr. Vaughan had been discussing a book with Trent, and Peter Grayson had been organizing the scorecards. Each account was precise, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment as she considered this. Hargreaves turned to the physical evidence. The weapon, a bronze statuette, one of those Greek god things found by the body. The blow was sharp, deliberate. The window was smashed, but there's no sign of an intruder. Mud on the floor, though, fresh and wet. Odd, considering it hasn't rained in days. Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the floor, though she was too far to see the conservatory now. Mud, she thought. From where? The gardens were dry, the paths graveled. A small detail, but one that tugged at her mind like a loose thread. The inspector continued, his gaze settling on Roger Ashby. "You, sir, spoke ill of your uncle earlier. Any bad blood with Miss Lyle, too?" Roger's face reddened. "I barely knew her. She was a mouse, always skittering about, saying nothing. If I've got a motive, Inspector, you'd do better to look at the will. We all know why we're here. Uncle Reginald's fortune is up for grabs tomorrow." "Roger," Sylvia hissed, her voice sharp. "Don't be reckless." Hargreaves's eyes narrowed. "The will, eh? And who stands to gain? Mr. Trent." The solicitor cleared his throat, his pomposity faltering. That is, the will is to be read tomorrow, as Lady Eleanor decreed. I cannot divulge its contents until then." "Convenient," Hargreaves muttered, scribbling in his notebook. "Right. I'll have my men search the grounds. Nobody move until we're done." As the inspector departed, the room exhaled, tension coiling tighter. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind sifting through the scene. The statuette, heavy enough to kill with a single blow. The shattered window, suggesting an escape that never happened. The mud, an anomaly in a dry summer. And then there was Beatrice Lyle herself, unremarkable, yet dead. Why her? Why now? Mrs. Bantry leaned closer. "Jane, you're awfully quiet. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "I make nothing of it, Clara, not yet. But I am listening. People, you know, are like my knitting. One dropped stitch, one tiny mistake, and the whole pattern unravels." She glanced at the group, noting Sylvia's bitten lip. Roger's clenched fists. Vaughn's unblinking stare. Someone, she thought, had dropped a stitch. And she, Jane Marple, would find it. Chapter 3. The Rival of Inside Library at Verdant Hall, with its heavy drapes and flickering fire, seemed to close in on the guests as the night deepened. The police had cordoned off the conservatory, and the distant murmur of their activity filtered through the walls. Inspector Hargreaves had left to oversee the search of the grounds, leaving the guests in a state of uneasy limbo. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the hearth, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the tension, observed the room with her usual quiet acuity. Her presence, so unassuming, was like a shadow that went unnoticed yet saw everything. Mrs. Bantry, ever restless, shifted in her seat. "It's dreadful, Jane," she whispered. "All of us sitting here like suspects in a play. I half expect someone to confess just to break the silence." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Confessions, Clara, are rarely so forthcoming. The guilty are often the most silent, for they have the most to hide." Her eyes drifted to the group, noting the small gestures that betrayed unease. Roger Ashby's fingers drumming on the armrest, Sylvia's quick glances toward the door, Dr. Vaughn's rigid posture, and Mr. Trent's incessant polishing of his spectacles. Young Peter Grayson, however, seemed oddly composed, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his gaze fixed on the fire. It was then that the door opened, and a new figure entered the scene. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, for she had been expecting him. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his impeccable mustache and polished shoes, stepped into the library, his eyes bright with curiosity. He carried a small valise, and his air of serene confidence seemed to shift the room's atmosphere, as if a spotlight had been turned on a darkened stage. "Bonsoir, Ms. Amos," Poirot said, his voice smooth and precise. "I regret to intrude upon such a tragic evening, but I was passing through St. Mary Mead on my way to London when my old friend Inspector Hargreaves requested my assistance. A murder, he tells me, in this very house. Most distressing." Lady Eleanor rose, her expression a mix of relief and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I am Lady Eleanor Ashby, and this is my home. Any help you can offer would be most welcome." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes sweeping the room. "I am but a humble servant of truth, madam. And this," he gestured to Miss Marple, who met his gaze with a nod, "is Mademoiselle Marple." Nest's pause. "We have not met, but I have heard of your remarkable perception." Miss Marple's smile was modest. "You are too kind, Monsieur Poirot. I am merely an observer of village life, but I am glad you are here. This is a puzzle that requires finesse." Double quotes. Mrs. Bantry stifled a chuckle. "Jane, you're as sly as ever. Monsieur Poirot, you'll find no better ally than her." Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. "I have no doubt. Now, let us proceed. Inspector Hargreaves has briefed me, but I prefer to form my own impressions. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, of this poor Mademoiselle Lyle. Who was she to you, and to this gathering?" Lady Eleanor recounted what she had told the inspector. Beatrice Lyle was a distant cousin of her late husband, Sir Reginald Ashby, invited out of familial duty. She was a quiet woman, almost invisible, Lady Eleanor said. "I cannot fathom why anyone would wish her harm." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Invisible, you say, yet someone saw her clearly enough to strike her down. Curious, non." He turned to the others. "And you, Ms. Amos, were all in this library at 9 o'clock. We, playing bridge, perhaps." The group murmured their agreement, their alibis. Unchanged. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Very well. I shall visit the scene of the crime, and then we shall talk further. Mademoiselle Marple, would you care to accompany me? Miss Marple set aside her knitting. I should be delighted, Monsieur Poirot. The conservatory was a stark contrast to the library's warmth. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and greenery, and the police lanterns cast harsh shadows across the glass walls. Beatrice Lyle's body had been removed, but the bronze statuette remained, its base still stained with blood. The shattered window gaped like a wound, and the smudge of mud on the floor was now marked by a chalk outline. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes darting from the statuette to the window to the mud. This statuette, he mused, it is heavy, but not so heavy that a woman could not wield it. And the window broken from the inside, I think, for the glass lies outward. A curious detail. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze on the mud. And this mud, Monsieur Poirot. The gardens are dry, yet here it is, fresh and damp. It suggests something brought from elsewhere, perhaps deliberately. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement, mademoiselle. You have the mind of a detective. This mud, it is a clue that does not belong. And the statuette, why choose such a weapon? It is not the nearest object, nor the most convenient. There is intention here, a message, perhaps. They returned to the library, where Poirot addressed the group. Ms. Amos, I have seen the scene, and I am intrigued. A murder so sudden, so precise. In a house full of people, it is not the work of an outsider, I think. I shall need to speak with each of you, to understand your movements, your thoughts. For now, I ask only that you remain vigilant. The truth, it hides in the smallest of details. As the guests dispersed to their rooms, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes meeting Poirot's. A complex affair, Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. But I suspect the answer lies not in what we see, but in what we do not. Poirot inclined his head. You are correct, mademoiselle. The little gray cells, they are already at work, and together we shall unravel this mystery. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The morning after Beatrice Lyle's murder dawned gray and oppressive. The skies over Whodunit Hall heavy with the threat of rain. The guests, confined to the manor by Inspector Hargreaves's orders, moved through the breakfast room with the stiffness of actors uncertain of their lines. Miss Jane Marple, seated at a corner table with a cup of tea and her ever-present knitting, observed the strained politeness that masked deeper tensions. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, joined her, his sharp eyes scanning the room as he sipped his tisane. Bon matin, Mademoiselle Marple, he said, his voice low. The air, it is thick with secrets. I propose we begin our inquiries today. The police, they will search for footprints and fingerprints. But we shall search for the truth in the hearts of men and women. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, people reveal themselves in the smallest ways. A glance, a hesitation, a word chosen with care. Shall we start with the interviews? Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching with anticipation. Let us begin with Lady Eleanor, as hostess. She knows the currents of this house better than any. They found Lady Eleanor in the morning room, a light-filled space overlooking the rose garden. She sat at a writing desk, her posture rigid, her emerald eyes wary as Poirot and Miss Marple entered. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple, she said, rising. I trust you slept well, despite everything. Sleep, madam, is a luxury when murder is afoot. Poirot replied, his tone polite but probing. May we speak of Mademoiselle Lyle? You described her as harmless. Yet someone found her dangerous enough to kill. What was her role in this gathering, truly? Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened on her pen. As I told the inspector, she was a distant cousin of my late husband, invited out of duty. She had no enemies, no wealth, no influence. Her presence was inconsequential. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle. Yet, Lady Eleanor, inconsequential people are rarely murdered. Had she spoken to you of any concerns? A letter, perhaps, or a conversation that troubled her? A flicker of unease crossed Lady Eleanor's face, quickly masked. No, nothing of the sort. Beatrice kept to herself, always embroidering or reading. She was dull, frankly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Dull, you say? Yet her death is anything but. Tell me, madam, where were you precisely at 9 o'clock last evening? In the library, as I said, Lady Eleanor replied, her voice steady. I was arranging the bridge tables, ensuring everyone had their partners. I heard the scream and ran to the conservatory with the others. Poirot nodded, making a mental note. Merci, madam. We shall speak again. Next, they interviewed Roger Ashby, who was found pacing the terrace, a cigarette burning between his fingers. His handsome face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot. This is a nightmare, he muttered as Poirot and Miss Marple approached. Beatrice, of all people, she was nobody. Nobody, Monsieur Ashby. Poirot's tone was sharp. Yet she is dead, and you spoke harshly of your uncle last night. Did Mademoiselle Lyle know something of your family? Perhaps something worth killing for? Roger's laugh was bitter. Beatrice, she was a mouse, scurrying around with her nose in her needlework. If she knew anything, she never said. As for me, I was in the library, getting a drink, when that scream came. Ask Sylvia, she saw me. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her question was precise. You mentioned the will, Mr. Ashby. Were you expecting a significant inheritance? Or perhaps fearing its loss? Roger's jaw tightened. Uncle Reginald was a miser. I hoped for something. Yes, but I didn't kill for it. You're barking up the wrong tree. The interviews continued through the morning. Sylvia Ashby, pale and nervous, confirmed she was by the fire, adjusting her shawl. At 9 o'clock, I saw Roger at the sideboard, she said, her voice trembling. We were all together, weren't we? Her eyes darted to Poirot, seeking reassurance. He did not give. Dr. Henry Vaughan, calm and composed, claimed he was discussing a medical text with Mr. Trent. Beatrice was a patient of mine years ago, he admitted. Nothing serious, nerves, mostly. I can't imagine why anyone would harm her. Mr. Trent, the solicitor, was pompous but evasive, insisting he was engrossed in conversation with Vaughan. The will is sealed until tomorrow, he said, adjusting his spectacles. I know nothing of its contents that would provoke murder. Young Peter Grayson, the clerk, was the last to be questioned. His boyish charm was tempered by a quiet intensity. I was sorting the scorecards, he said. Miss Lyle was kind to me, gave me a book on botany once. I can't believe she's gone. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but penetrating. And the scream. Monsieur Grayson? Did you notice anything before it? A sound, a movement? Peter hesitated, his eyes flickering. I thought I heard a rustle, like someone moving through the hall. But it was faint, and then the scream came. Miss Marple noted the hesitation, her mind cataloguing it alongside the mud, the statuette, And the broken window. As they left Peter, she murmured to Poirot, "He knows more than he says, I think. But whether it is guilt or fear, I cannot yet tell." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "The little grey cells. They are busy, Mademoiselle Marple. Each alibi is perfect, yet imperfect. The truth lies in the contradictions, and we shall find them." As they returned to the library, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the doorway to the conservatory, now sealed with police tape. The mud, the statuette, the scream, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she felt the pattern beginning to form, elusive but tantalizingly close. Chapter 5. The red herrings. The atmosphere in Verdant Hall grew heavier as the day wore on, the weight of Beatrice Lyle's murder pressing upon the guests like a storm cloud refusing to break. The police, under Inspector Hargreaves's brusque command, continued their methodical search of the grounds, their voices occasionally drifting through the windows. Inside, the library remained a sanctuary of sorts, though its oak-paneled walls seemed to absorb the growing unease. Miss Jane Marple sat by a window, her knitting a quiet rhythm, while Hercule Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man piecing together a mosaic. Inspector Hargreaves burst into the room at noon, his face flushed with the certainty of a man who believed he had cracked the case. "We've found something," he announced, holding up a small, monogrammed handkerchief stained with a faint smear of blood, found near the conservatory window, tucked under a fern. "The initials are A. Roger Ashby. Care to explain?" Roger, who had been slouched in an armchair, leapt to his feet, his face paling. "That's absurd. I didn't. My handkerchiefs are in my room. Anyone could have taken one." Sylvia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Roger, you didn't. You couldn't." "I didn't," Roger snapped, his eyes darting to the other guests. "This is a setup, I tell you." Hargreaves's mustache twitched with satisfaction. "We also found a cigarette butt near the window. Same brand you smoke, Ashby. And your outburst about your uncle last night, bad blood, was it? Maybe Miss Lyle knew something you didn't want aired before the will's read." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Un moment, Inspector. The handkerchief. It is a clue. But a clue to what? It is too convenient, non? A murderer who leaves such an obvious trail is either very foolish or very clever." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze fixed on Roger. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. In my village, I once knew a young man who lost a button from his coat near a theft. Everyone assumed his guilt, but it was another who had borrowed his coat. Things are not always as they seem." Hargreaves snorted. "We'll see about that. Ashby, you're coming with me for further questioning." As Roger was led away, protesting vehemently, the room erupted in murmurs. Sylvia buried her face in her hands, while Lady Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line. Dr. Vaughan remained impassive, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his teacup. Mr. Trent muttered about unseemly haste, and Peter Grayson, ever the quiet observer, watched the scene with wide, unreadable eyes. Poirot turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "The inspector, he is eager, but he sees only the surface. This handkerchief, this cigarette, they are distractions, I think. The true path lies elsewhere." Miss Marple nodded, her mind returning to the conservatory. "The mud, monsieur Poirot. It bothers me still. And the statuette, why choose it when a knife or a candlestick would have been easier? There's a purpose here, a message we have not yet read." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisement. Let us revisit the conservatory, mademoiselle. while the inspector chases his red herring. The conservatory, though still sealed by police tape, was accessible to Poirot, whose reputation granted him certain liberties. The scene was much as they had left it, the chalk outline marking Beatrice's body, the bronze statuette now in police custody but its position noted, the shattered window, and the faint smudge of mud. Poirot knelt by the window, his fingers tracing the frame. The glass, it is broken outward, as we observed. But see here, mademoiselle, the shards are uneven, some larger than others. A hurried act, perhaps, but not random. Miss Marple peered at the floor, her eyes narrowing. And the mud, it is not smeared, but distinct, like a footprint deliberately placed. Yet the gardens are dry. Could it have come from inside the house? Perhaps from a potted plant. Poirot's mustache twitched. An excellent thought. The conservatory is full of earth. Yet this mud is darker, richer. It does not match the soil here. We must inquire about the house, its cellars, its hidden corners. Their inspection was interrupted by a constable, who reported that the grounds search had yielded nothing, no footprints, no signs of an intruder. Poirot thanked him, then turned to Miss Marple. No intruder, no escape. The answer. It is within these walls, among these people. Back in the library, the guests were restless, their alibis now tinged with doubt. Sylvia, tearful, approached. Poirot, Monsieur Poirot, you must help Roger. He's hot-headed, yes, but he's no murderer. That handkerchief fit could belong to anyone. Poirot's gaze was gentle but probing. Madam, tell me, did you see your husband at the sideboard, as you claimed? Or was he perhaps elsewhere for a moment? Sylvia hesitated, her eyes flickering. I think he was there. It was all so quick. The scream, the rush to the conservatory. Miss Marple noted the hesitation, filing it away with Peter Grayson's earlier pause. Mrs. Ashby, she said softly, sometimes we protect those we love without realizing the cost. If you saw anything, even a small thing, it might help. Sylvia's lips trembled, but she shook her head. I saw nothing. I swear it. As the day waned, Poirot and Miss Marple conferred quietly. The handkerchief, the cigarette, they point to Roger. Yet they are too perfect, Poirot mused. Someone wishes us to look at him, to distract from the truth. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. In my village, when a dog barks loudly, it is often to drown out a quieter sound. We must listen for that sound, Monsieur Poirot. The library clock struck 3. Its chimes a reminder of time slipping away. The red herrings had been cast. But the truth, Miss Marple knew, was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 6. A clue. In detailed afternoon sun cast long shadows across Verdant Hall, its golden rays doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the manor. The guests, still confined by Inspector Hargreaves's orders, moved restlessly through the drawing room, their polite facades fraying under the strain of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual corner with her knitting, observed the subtle cracks in their composure. Sylvia Ashby's bitten nails, Dr. Vaughan's too steady gaze, Mr. Trent's nervous cough. Hercule Poirot, ever the picture of precision, stood by a window, his eyes fixed on the rose garden, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. Mademoiselle Marple, Poirot said quietly, joining her, the inspector. He chases his handkerchief and his cigarette. But we must look deeper. There is a detail, I think, that we have overlooked, a small thing, but significant. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild eyes meeting his. I quite agree, Monsieur Poirot. In my village, I once solved a theft because of a single petal left on a windowsill. The smallest things often tell the loudest stories. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young constable, who carried a small evidence bag. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," he said, his voice hesitant, "we found this in the conservatory, caught in the leaves of a fern near the body. The inspector thought you should see it." He held out the bag, revealing a single pearl earring, its delicate filigree glinting in the light. Poirot took it, turning it carefully in his gloved fingers. "Most interesting," he murmured. "A woman's earring. And yet, none of the ladies here have mentioned losing such a thing." Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "It is a fine piece, but not new. See the slight tarnish on the clasp. It suggests age, or perhaps neglect. We must ask who wears such earrings and who does not." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching with interest. "Let us gather the ladies, mademoiselle, and inquire." They assembled Lady Eleanor, Sylvia Ashby, and Mrs. Bantry in the morning room, where the pearl earring was presented. Lady Eleanor's brow furrowed as she examined it. "It's not mine," she said firmly. "I wear emeralds. As you can see," she gestured to her own earlobes, adorned with green stones that matched her gown. Sylvia, pale and nervous, shook her head. "I don't wear pearls. They're too old-fashioned for me. Mine are all gold or diamonds." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers twisted her wedding ring. Mrs. Bantry, ever forthright, laughed. "Goodness, it's not mine either. I haven't worn pearls since my debutante days, and even then, they were my mother's. Dreadfully heavy things." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, this earring was found near Mademoiselle Lyle's body. If it does not belong to any of you, perhaps it belonged to the victim herself. Or," he paused, his gaze sweeping the room, "perhaps it was left there deliberately to mislead." Miss Marple's mind turned to Beatrice Lyle, that quiet, unremarkable woman. "Did Miss Lyle wear earrings, Lady Eleanor?" she asked gently. "I don't recall noticing any last evening." Lady Eleanor hesitated, her expression uncertain. I'm not sure." Beatrice was so plain, one hardly noticed such things. "But I suppose she might have." Poirot made a note, then turned to the group. "Ms. Amos, I must ask you to recall the moments before the scream. Did anyone see Mademoiselle Lyle leave the library? Did she mention feeling unwell, or needing air?" The responses were vague. Roger, still under scrutiny, claimed he hadn't noticed Beatrice at all. Sylvia said she thought Beatrice had been at the bridge table, but couldn't be sure. Dr. Vaughan, with his usual calm, said he'd seen her slip out quietly, perhaps to the conservatory, but he hadn't thought it significant. Mr. Trent and Peter Grayson both claimed ignorance, their alibis holding firm. Miss Marple, however, caught a fleeting look in Peter's eyes, a flicker of something, not quite fear, but knowledge. "Mr. Grayson," she said softly, "you mentioned a rustle before the scream. Could it have been Miss Lyle moving through the hall, perhaps, or someone following her?" Peter's cheeks flushed slightly. I suppose it could have been. It was so faint. I didn't think much of it at the time." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, monsieur, you remembered it. The mind, it clings to what matters, even if we do not know why. Tell me, did you see Mademoiselle Lyle with this earring?" Peter shook his head, too quickly. "No, I didn't. I told you, she was kind to me, but I didn't notice her jewelry." As the group dispersed, Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a glance. "The earring," Poirot said. "It is a clue that does not fit If it is not Miss Lyle's, then whose? And why leave it there, unless to point us in a false direction? Miss Marple nodded, her mind sifting through the details. The mud, the statuette, the broken window, and now the pearl earring. In my village, she mused, a woman once left a hairpin at a scene to implicate another. But the hairpin was too new, too polished. This earring, with its tarnish, feels personal, as if it carries a story of its own. Poirot's eyes twinkled. You are a poet, Mademoiselle Marple, but also a detective. This earring, it is a thread in the tapestry. We must pull it gently, lest the whole pattern unravels too soon. As they returned to the library, the clock struck 4. Its chimes a quiet reminder of time pressing forward. The earring, small and seemingly insignificant, had shifted the puzzle, and Miss Marple felt the truth drawing closer, hidden in the details that others overlooked. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. Late afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Verdant Hall, casting a muted glow over the library where the guests remained, their nerves frayed by the unrelenting shadow of murder. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly, her knitting a steady rhythm, her eyes flitting from face to face, noting the cracks in their carefully maintained facades. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, stood by a bookshelf, his fingers tracing the spine of a volume as if it might yield secrets as readily as the people. Before him, the discovery of the pearl earring had stirred the house, its implications rippling through the guests like a stone dropped in still water. Inspector Hargreaves, still focused on Roger Ashby, had taken the earring as further evidence of foul play, though he grumbled about its lack of clear ownership. Poirot, however, saw it as a piece of a larger puzzle, and Miss Marple, with her knack for human nature, sensed that the truth was beginning to surface. Like a weed breaking through cracked earth, the tension broke when Sylvia Ashby, her auburn hair disheveled and her eyes red-rimmed, rose abruptly from her chair. "I can't bear this any longer," she cried, her voice sharp with desperation. "All these questions, these accusations, Roger didn't do it, I tell you. But someone here knows more than they're saying." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Sylvia. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, and Dr. Vaughan's hand paused mid-gesture, while Mr. Trent's spectacles slipped down his nose. Peter Grayson, standing near the door, looked startled, his boyish charm giving way to a flicker of unease. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Madam Ashby, you speak with passion. If you know something, it is best to share it now. The truth. It cannot be hidden forever." Sylvia's hands trembled as she sank back into her chair. I didn't want to say, but last night, before the scream, I saw Beatrice in the hall. She was speaking to someone, in whispers. I couldn't hear what they said, but she looked frightened. Miss Marple's needles stilled, her gaze soft but piercing. And who was she speaking to? Mrs. Ashby. This is important. Sylvia hesitated, her eyes darting to her husband, who sat rigid, his face pale. I'm not sure. It was dark, and I only caught a glimpse, but it was a man, I think someone tall. The room stirred, suspicion shifting like a tide. Roger's jaw clenched, and he muttered, "This is nonsense. I was in the library, Sylvia. You said so yourself." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, madam, you now recall this conversation. Why did you not mention it before? Was it fear, perhaps, or loyalty?" Sylvia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't want to make things worse for Roger. He's been so angry about the will, about Uncle Reginald. I thought it might look bad." Miss Marple noted the tremor in Sylvia's voice, the way her eyes avoided Roger's loyalty. She thought, or perhaps guilt. In her village, she had once known a wife who protected her husband's secrets, only to discover they were not his alone. Poirot turned to the group. Ms. Amos, this new detail. It changes things. A whispered conversation, a frightened woman, and then murder. Who among you spoke with Mademoiselle Lyle before her death? Speak now, or the truth will find you in its own way. Dr. Vaughan cleared his throat, his calm demeanor unshaken. I spoke to Beatrice earlier in the evening about her health. She mentioned feeling anxious, but nothing specific. It was a brief exchange. In the library, Mr. Trent, flustered, adjusted his spectacles. I had no such conversation. I was busy with the bridge scores, as I've said. Peter Grayson, his voice quiet but steady, added, I saw her in the hall, too, just passing through. She seemed distracted, but I didn't stop to talk. Poirot's gaze lingered on Peter, his mustache twitching. Distracted, you say, and yet you heard a rustle, and now you recall her in the hall. Your memory, it is most selective, Monsieur Grayson. Peter flushed, his hands clenching. I'm trying to help, that's all. I didn't think it mattered at the time. Miss Marple's mind turned to the earring, the mud, the statuette. Sylvia's revelation had opened a crack, revealing hidden currents. A whispered conversation, a frightened woman, a man in the shadows. But whose shadow? And why had Beatrice been chosen as the victim? As the guests dispersed for a late tea, Poirot and Miss Marple lingered in the library. The lies. They multiply, Poirot said, his voice low. Madame Ashby's story. It is incomplete. She protects someone, or perhaps she fears them. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on her knitting. In my village, a young woman once lied to protect her lover, only to find he was protecting another. Sylvia's fear is real, but whether it is for Roger or of him, I cannot yet say. Poirot's eyes twinkled. We are of one mind, mademoiselle. The earring, the mud, the whispers, they are threads in a tapestry of deception. We must pull them carefully, for the pattern is beginning to emerge. The clock struck 6, its chimes echoing through the library. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the secrets buried within Verdant Hall. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. Rain had begun to fall in earnest, drumming against the windows of Verdant Hall and cloaking the manor in a veil of grey mist. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive, the guests' nerves stretched, taut by the unrelenting scrutiny of murder. The library, once a haven of intellectual repose, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in on secrets that could no longer be contained. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting a quiet counterpoint to the storm outside, sat with her usual composure, her eyes alert to the shifting dynamics of the room. Hercule Poirot, his demeanor as polished as ever, stood by the fireplace, his gaze moving from face to face, searching for the crack that would break the case open. The revelation of Sylvia Ashby's whispered sighting of Beatrice Lyle had stirred the group, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion. Inspector Hargreaves, still convinced of Roger Ashby's guilt, had doubled down on his interrogations. But Poirot and Miss Marple knew the truth lay deeper, buried in the subtle contradictions of human behavior. It was during the late afternoon tea, served in the drawing-room amidst strained pleasantries, that the first true fracture appeared. Lady Eleanor, who had maintained her regal composure throughout, set her teacup down with a clatter that drew every eye. Her face, usually so controlled, was pale, her lips trembling. I cannot endure this any longer, she said, her voice low but carrying the weight of suppressed emotion. Beatrice was my cousin, however distant, and I invited her here. If I had known, if I had suspected. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. The room stilled, the clink of teaspoons and murmur of conversation falling silent. Sylvia reached out, then hesitated, her own distress evident. Roger, still under the inspector's shadow, looked at his aunt with a mix of surprise and suspicion. Dr. Vaughan's eyes narrowed slightly, and Mr. Trent fumbled with his spectacles. While Peter Grayson's hands clenched in his lap, Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle but incisive. Madam, you speak of guilt, but not of knowledge. What is it that you suspect now, that you did not before? Speak, I implore you, for the truth is near. Lady Eleanor's eyes met his, and for a moment, they held a depth of pain that startled even Miss Marple. Beatrice. She came to me 2 days ago, before the guests arrived. Lady Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was nervous, agitated. She said she had found something papers, old letters in the attic while helping me sort through Reginald's things. She wouldn't say what they contained, only that they were important and that she feared they might cause trouble. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. Letters, Lady Eleanor, she asked softly. Did she say who they concerned, or why they troubled her? Lady Eleanor shook her head, her hands twisting in her lap. She wouldn't tell me. She said she needed to think, to decide what to do. I thought it was just her nerves, she was always so timid. But now, I fear she found something someone wanted kept hidden. Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming with interest. Letters, you say? And where are these letters now? Madam, did she keep them with her? I don't know, Lady Eleanor admitted. She said she'd hidden them, but she didn't say where. I didn't press her, I should have, but I didn't. The room erupted in murmurs, the guests exchanging glances heavy with implication. Roger's voice cut through, sharp and defensive. Letters. What nonsense is this? If Beatrice had something, why didn't she speak up? This sounds like a convenient story to shift blame. Sylvia's hand gripped his arm. Roger, please, don't make it worse. Dr. Vaughan spoke, his voice calm but measured. If these letters exist, they could explain why Beatrice was targeted. Perhaps she confided in someone else, someone who saw an opportunity or a threat. Poirot turned to him, his gaze piercing. And you, Doctor, did she confide in you? You mentioned her nerves, her anxiety. Did she speak of these letters? Vaughan's expression remained steady. No, she did not. Our conversations were about her health, nothing more. Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of Vaughan's jaw, the way Peter Grayson's eyes flickered toward him. In her village, she had once known a man who spoke with such calm, only to be undone by a single lie. She filed the observation away, her mind returning to the earring, the mud, the statuette, and now, the letters. Poirot addressed the group. Ms. Amos, this revelation changes much. Letters, hidden and dangerous, suggest a motive rooted in the past. We must find these papers, for they may hold the key to Mademoiselle Lyle's death. I urge you to search your memories. Did you see her with anything unusual? A packet, a book? Perhaps. The responses were vague, tinged with unease. Mr. Trent claimed ignorance. Peter said he'd seen Beatrice with her embroidery bag but nothing else. And Sylvia insisted she'd noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Yet Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Peter, whose hesitation, though brief, was becoming a pattern. As the tea was cleared away, Poirot and Miss Marple retreated to a quiet corner. The letters, Poirot said, his voice low. They are the heart of this mystery, I think. They explain why Mademoiselle Lyle, so quiet, so invisible, was chosen. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. In my village, a woman once hid a letter in her sewing basket, thinking it safe. Beatrice was fond of needlework. Perhaps we should look there. Poirot's eyes twinkled. You are a marvel, Mademoiselle Marple. Let us examine her belongings, with the inspector's permission, and let us watch. For someone in this house knows more than they say. The rain continued to fall, its rhythm a somber backdrop to the unraveling secrets of Verdant Hall. The letters, if they existed, were a thread that could pull the entire tapestry apart, and Miss Marple sensed that the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 9. The trapped rain had settled into a steady drizzle, cloaking Verdant Hall in a damp, mournful hush. The guests, their nerves frayed by the weight of suspicion and Lady Eleanor's revelation about Beatrice Lyle's hidden letters, moved through the manor like actors in a play nearing its climax. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting set aside for the moment, sat in the drawing room, her mild eyes scanning the group with the quiet intensity of one who sees beyond the surface. Hercule Poirot, his demeanor as polished as ever, stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind a whirl of calculations. Lady Eleanor's confession about the letters had shifted the atmosphere, stirring unease that bordered on panic. Inspector Hargreaves, still focused on Roger Ashby, had dismissed the letters as a distraction. But Poirot and Miss Marple knew better. The truth, they sensed, was teetering on the edge of revelation, and it was time to apply pressure to force it into the open. Mademoiselle Marple, Poirot murmured, leaning close. The time has come to set a trap. The guilty, they are nervous now, their lies beginning to unravel. We must gather them all and observe. Someone will betray themselves. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. In my village, I once caught a thief by leaving a tempting bait, a purse left carelessly on a table. The guilty cannot resist the urge to act. What bait do you propose, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. The letters, mademoiselle. We shall announce that we have found them or are close to finding them. The one who fears their contents will act, and we shall be watching. With Inspector Hargreaves's reluctant permission, Poirot arranged for the guests to gather in the library at 8 o'clock that evening. The room, with its heavy oak shelves and flickering fire, was the perfect stage for what Poirot called a little exercise in psychology. The guests arrived, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Lady Eleanor, regal but pale. Roger, defiant, despite his status as prime suspect. Sylvia, her hands twisting nervously. Dr. Vaughan, calm but watchful. Mr. Trent, pompous yet uneasy. And Peter Grayson, his boyish charm overshadowed by a guarded expression. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. Ms. Amos, he began, his voice clear and measured. The investigation into the death of Mademoiselle Lyle has taken a most interesting turn. Thanks to the diligence of Mademoiselle Marple and myself, we have learned of certain letters papers hidden by the victim that may reveal the motive for her murder. I am pleased to say that we are very close to locating these documents. A ripple of tension passed through the group. Lady Eleanor's hand tightened on her armrest. Sylvia's eyes darted to Roger, and Peter Grayson's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Miss Marple, seated quietly, noted every reaction, her mind cataloging the subtle signs of fear. Poirot continued, his tone deceptively casual. These letters, They are hidden somewhere in this house, perhaps in a place Mademoiselle Lyle thought. Save her embroidery bag, perhaps, or a drawer in her room. We shall search thoroughly tomorrow. But I invite you all to reflect. If you know of these letters, or what they contain, speak now. The truth. It will not stay hidden. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken thoughts. Mr. Trent cleared his throat, his voice strained. This is preposterous. If such letters exist, they're likely nothing old family correspondence. No more. Dr. Vaughn's voice was calm, almost too calm. If they're so insignificant, Mr. Trent, why would someone kill to keep them hidden? Roger's temper flared. This is a witch hunt. First my handkerchief, now these phantom letters. You're trying to pin this on me, aren't you? Sylvia's voice broken, trembling. Roger, stop. You're only making it worse. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his gaze moving from one face to another. The guilty. They are always the most restless. I ask you all to remain in the house tonight. The letters, they will be found, and with them, the truth. As the group dispersed, their murmurs filled with unease. Poirot and Miss Marple retreated to a quiet corner. The trap is set, Poirot said softly. Someone will act tonight, I am certain. We must watch the places where secrets might be. Hidden Beatrice's room, the conservatory, perhaps the attic. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to her village, where a whispered rumor had once led to a midnight confession. In my experience, Monsieur Poirot, the guilty are drawn to their secrets like moths to a flame. We must be ready. With the inspector's approval, they arranged for a discreet watch. Poirot stationed himself near the staircase, hidden in the shadows, while Miss Marple, with her knack for blending into the background, took a seat in the hall outside Beatrice's room, her knitting a perfect pretense. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, the rain's soft patter the only sound at 10:30. A faint creak echoed from the upper landing. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, her needles still. A figure moved stealthily down the corridor, pausing at Beatrice's door. The dim light revealed Peter Grayson, his face pale, his hands fumbling with the knob. He slipped inside, and Miss Marple rose silently, signaling to Poirot, who emerged from his hiding place. They entered the room to find Peter rifling through Beatrice's embroidery bag, his movements frantic. He froze as Poirot's voice cut through the silence. Monsieur Grayson, what is it you seek so urgently? Peter's hands dropped, his eyes wide with panic. I was just looking for something. She borrowed a book. That's all. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. A book, Mr. Grayson? Or perhaps the letters Lady Eleanor spoke of. You seem very anxious for a man seeking something so innocent. Peter's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. I didn't kill her, I swear. But I know about the letters. She told me they were dangerous, that they could ruin someone. I thought if I found them, I could protect her memory. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. And yet, you did not tell us this before. What do these letters contain, monsieur? Speak, or the trap closes around you. Peter hesitated, his eyes darting between Poirot and Miss Marple. The rain drummed on, and the truth, Miss Marple sensed, was teetering on the edge of revelation. Chapter 10. The revealed library at Verdant Hall was steeped in a tense silence, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. The guests had been summoned once more, their faces a gallery of apprehension, curiosity, and barely concealed fear. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting abandoned for the moment, her mild eyes sharp with anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating authority, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour. The trap had been sprung, and Peter Grayson's midnight search had brought the mystery to its tipping point. Now, it was time for the truth to be laid bare. "Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "the murder of Mademoiselle Beatrice Lyle has puzzled us all. But the little Grace cells, they have been at work, with the assistance of Mademoiselle Marple, whose insight is as formidable as it is unassuming. We have unraveled the threads of this deception. Tonight, we shall reveal the truth." The guests shifted uneasily. Lady Eleanor's hands were clasped tightly. Roger Ashby's jaw was set. Sylvia's eyes darted nervously. Dr. Vaughan maintained his stoic calm. Mr. Trent fidgeted with his spectacles. And Peter Grayson, pale and shaken from his encounter in Beatrice's room, stared at the floor. Poirot paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. "Let us begin with the scene. Mademoiselle Lyle, struck dead in the conservatory with a bronze statuette at 9 o'clock. A broken window, a smudge of mud, a pearl earring. And now, the talk of hidden letters. These are not random details, none, but pieces of a puzzle carefully constructed." Miss Marple nodded slightly, her voice soft but clear. "In my village, I once saw a crime solved because of a single mismatched thread in a quilt. Here, too, the details do not match unless we look at them correctly," Poirot continued, his tone measured. "First, the alibis. All of you claim to have been in the library at 9, yet Mademoiselle Lyle was seen in the hall, whispering with a man. Madame Ashby, you saw this, but you hesitated to name him. Why?" Sylvia's face crumpled. I thought it might be Roger. I didn't want to believe it, but I saw him step out briefly, just before the scream." Roger's eyes blazed. "That's a lie. I was at the sideboard, Sylvia. You know that." Poirot raised a hand. "A moment. Monsieur Ashby. The handkerchief with your initials, the cigarette they pointed to you, but too conveniently. They were placed, I think, to mislead. But let us consider the mud. The gardens were dry, yet there it was, dark and damp. Mademoiselle Marple suggested it came from within the house, perhaps from a potted plant. But no, the conservatory soil was light, sandy. This mud came from the cellar, where old pipes leak and the earth is wet." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "And the earring, Monsieur Poirot. It was tarnished, not worn recently. Beatrice wore no jewelry that night. Yet there it was, caught in a fern. A clue left to confuse, perhaps." "Precisement," Poirot said, his gaze turning to Peter Grayson. "Monsieur Grayson, you were caught searching Mademoiselle Lyle's room, seeking letters she told you were dangerous. You claimed to protect her memory, but I think you sought to protect another or yourself." Peter's voice was hoarse. "I didn't kill her. She told me about the letters, said they could ruin someone. I thought they were in her bag. But I found nothing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And that is the key. The letters were not in her bag, nor in her room. They were hidden elsewhere, and I believe I know where." He paused, letting the tension build. "But first, let us consider motive. Mademoiselle Lyle was no threat, a quiet woman. Yet she died because she knew too much. The letters, they concern the late Sir Reginald Ashby. None, and his will." Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot turned to her. "Madam, you said Beatrice found letters in the attic, papers that troubled her. I propose they revealed a secret about Sir Reginald's fortune, a secret someone wished to keep buried. But who?" "Monsieur Trent, As solicitor, you know the will's contents. Did it contain a surprise? Trent's face reddened. I cannot divulge. You need not. Poirot interrupted. The letters, they were found this evening, hidden in the lining of a book in the library, a volume on botany, a gift from Mademoiselle Lisle to Monsieur Grayson. They reveal that Sir Reginald had a second will, one that altered the inheritance, leaving the bulk to a charity, not to his family. A collective gasp filled the room. Roger leapt to his feet. That's impossible. He wouldn't. Poirot's voice was sharp. But he did. And someone knew someone who spoke to Beatrice in the hall. Someone who followed her to the conservatory, struck her with the statuette, and broke the window to suggest an intruder. The mud was tracked from the cellar, where the murderer passed, to avoid the main corridors. And the earring, it belonged to Mademoiselle Lisle's mother, kept as a keepsake, planted to mislead. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. And that someone, I think, is you, Dr. Vaughan. The room froze. Vaughan's calm facade cracked, his eyes widening. This is absurd. I was in the library, discussing a book with Trent. Poirot shook his head. Non, doctor. You slipped out, unseen, through the hall. You spoke to Beatrice, learned of the letters, and acted to silence her. The mud on your shoes, the earring you took from her keepsakes, the statuette you chose to make. It seemed impulsive, all point to you. You knew of the second will, for Sir Reginald confided in you, his physician. And you feared its revelation would ruin your plans, perhaps a scheme to manipulate the estate. Through your influence over Lady Eleanor. Vaughan's face contorted. But before he could protest, Miss Marple added, in my village, a man once betrayed himself by a single lie about a time. Your alibi, Dr. Vaughan, is too perfect. And yet Peter saw you in the hall, didn't he? Peter nodded, his voice trembling. I didn't want to say. I saw him follow her, but I thought I was mistaken. Vaughan's shoulders slumped, his voice low. I didn't mean to kill her. She was going to tell everyone, ruin everything. I only wanted to talk, but she panicked. And I struck her. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. The truth, it always emerges. Inspector Hargreaves, you may take him. As Vaughan was led away, the room exhaled, the weight of the mystery lifting. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her eyes thoughtful. The truth had been found, but at a cost, as it always was. Chapter 11. The reflection thay rain had ceased, leaving Verdant Hall bathed in the soft, silver light of a clearing sky. The library, where the dramatic revelation of Dr. Vaughan's guilt had unfolded only hours before, now felt quieter, as if the manor itself had exhaled a long-held breath. The guests, their faces a mix of relief and lingering shock, had dispersed to their rooms, leaving Miss Jane Marple and Hercule Poirot alone by the dying embers of the fire. Inspector Hargreaves and his men had taken Dr. Vaughan into custody, and the machinery of justice was now in motion. But for Miss Marple and Poirot, the case was not yet fully closed, not until the human truths behind it were understood. Miss Marple sat her knitting in her lap, her fingers resting lightly on the needles. It is always a sad thing, Monsieur Poirot, to see a man brought low by his own actions. Dr. Vaughan seemed so composed, so respectable. Yet, in my village, I have seen such men before, calm on the surface, but driven by desires they cannot control. Poirot nodded, his eyes fixed on the glowing coals. Oui, Mademoiselle Marple, it is the tragedy of human nature. The little, gray cells, they reveal the truth, but they cannot undo the choices that lead to such ends. Dr. Vaughan, he was a man of intellect, Yet he succumbed to greed and fear. The letters, they were his undoing. Miss Marple's gaze was thoughtful, her voice soft. The letters, yes, they held the secret of Sir Reginald's second will. But it was not just the money, was it? Dr. Vaughan feared exposure, his influence over Lady Eleanor, perhaps even a deeper connection to the Ashby family. In my village, I once knew a doctor who kept secrets for his patients, only to use them for his own gain. People trust doctors, you see, and that trust can be a dangerous thing. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. You have a remarkable insight, mademoiselle. You see the patterns of the heart, where I see the patterns of logic. Together, we have unraveled a tapestry most intricate. The mud from the cellar, the tarnished earring, the statuette, the broken window, all were threads. But the letters, they were the needle that stitched the crime. Together, he leaned back, his hands clasped. Consider the method, mademoiselle. Vaughan chose the statuette, not because it was convenient, but because it was heavy, deliberate, a symbol, perhaps, of the weight of his secret. The window, broken outward, was to suggest an intruder, but the mud betrayed him. It came from the cellar, where he passed to avoid the main corridors, and the earring, taken from Beatrice's keepsakes, was meant to confuse, to point to a woman's hand. But the little grey cells, they see through such tricks. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant, and Peter Grayson's hesitation poor. Boy, he saw more than he wanted to admit. In my village, young men often keep silent out of loyalty or fear. He knew Dr. Vaughan had followed Beatrice, but he couldn't bring himself to speak until the trap was sprung. Poirot's expression softened. The young Grayson, he is not unlike my friend Hastings, well-meaning, but caught in the web of others' secrets. Chapter 12. The aftermath. Morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a tentative light over Verdant Hall, as if nature itself sought to soothe the wounds of the previous days. The manor, though still grand, seemed diminished, its opulent rooms now touched by the shadow of tragedy. The guests, released from the confines of Inspector Hargreaves's investigation, prepared to depart, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with a cup of tea, observed their comings and goings, her knitting needles clicking softly, her mind still sifting through the human complexities of the case. Hercule Poirot, his valise packed for his return to London, joined her, his demeanor as polished as ever, though his eyes held a reflective depth. Mademoiselle Marple, Poirot said, settling into a chair opposite her, the case is closed, the guilty apprehended. Yet I sense you are not entirely at peace. The little grey cells, they still ponder. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. The truth has been found, yes, but truth leaves ripples, does it not? In my village, I have seen how a single crime can alter lives forever. Here, too, I wonder about those left behind, Lady Eleanor, Roger, Sylvia, young Peter. They must carry this with them. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching thoughtfully. The ripples, they spread. Dr. Vaughan's confession has lifted the veil, but it has also exposed the fragility of trust. Lady Eleanor, she trusted him as her confidant, her physician. Now, she must face the betrayal. The morning room door opened, and Lady Eleanor entered, her emerald gown replaced by somber black, her face pale but composed. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple, she said, her voice steady but strained, I owe you both my thanks. Without your insight, we might never have known the truth about Beatrice's death. Miss Marple inclined her head. It was our duty, Lady Eleanor, but I am sorry for the pain it has caused you. Beatrice's loss, and now Dr. Vaughan's betrayal, it is a heavy burden. Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. Beatrice was insignificant to many, but she was family, and Dr. Vaughan, I trusted him implicitly. To think he used that trust to conceal his greed. She paused, her voice breaking. The second will, it changes everything. Reginald's fortune to a charity I never suspected. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Madam, the letters revealed Sir Reginald's true intentions, but they also revealed Dr. Vaughan's motive. He believed he could control the estate through you, perhaps even alter the will's execution. When Beatrice discovered the letters, she became a threat he could not ignore. Lady Eleanor nodded, her hands clasped tightly. I shall ensure the will is honored, for Beatrice's sake. But this house, it feels tainted now. I may sell Verdant Hall, start anew. Miss Marple's eyes softened. In my village, I have seen homes reborn after tragedy. Time, Lady Eleanor, and kindness, these things heal. As Lady Eleanor excused herself, Roger and Sylvia Ashby appeared, their faces drawn. Roger's earlier defiance had softened, replaced by a weary resignation. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple, he said, his voice low. I was a fool to speak so rashly about my uncle. I thought the handkerchief, the cigarette, they were my doom. Thank you for seeing through it. Sylvia's hand rested on his arm, her eyes red-rimmed. We're leaving today. Roger's promised to be less impulsive. This has changed us. Poirot's gaze was kind but piercing. Madam, monsieur, the truth has set you free, but it also teaches. Cherish what you have, and let suspicion not poison your hearts. As the couple departed, Peter Grayson entered, his boyish face shadowed by guilt. I should have spoken sooner, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw Dr. Vaughan in the hall, but I couldn't believe he'd do such a thing. I was afraid. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. Fear, Mr. Grayson, is a natural thing. In my village, I knew a boy who kept silent about a theft out of loyalty. You did right in the end, and that is what matters. Peter nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I'll try to remember that. Thank you, Miss Marple. As the young man left, Poirot turned to Miss Marple, his eyes twinkling. You have a gift, mademoiselle, for mending hearts as well as solving crimes. This case, it was a collaboration most splendid. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. And you, Monsieur Poirot, have a mind like a diamond, sharp and brilliant. I dare say St. Mary Mead will seem quiet after this, but I shall keep watch. As always, Poirot rose, adjusting his coat. And I shall return to London, where the little grey cells will no doubt find another puzzle. Au revoir, Mademoiselle Marple. Until we meet again. As he departed, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the garden beyond. Verdant Hall would heal, in time, as would its people. But the truth, she knew, was a light that illuminated both good and ill, and she would always be ready to shine it when called upon. Chapter 13. The unraveling threads. The morning at Verdant Hall carried a fragile sense of renewal, as if the manor itself were attempting to shake off the darkness of the past days. The sun, now fully emerged from the clouds, cast a warm glow through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, observed the quiet bustle of departure servants carrying luggage. guests exchanging subdued farewells. Hercule Poirot had left for London at dawn, his parting words to Miss Marple still lingering in her mind. The truth, mademoiselle, is a garden that requires constant tending. She smiled faintly, her needles clicking, knowing that her own tending would continue in St. Mary Mead. The resolution of Beatrice Lyle's murder had lifted the immediate weight of suspicion, but it had left behind a tapestry of broken trust and altered futures. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the nuances of human behavior, sensed that the ripples of the crime were far from settled. There were threads still loose, questions unanswered, not about the murder itself, but about the lives it had touched. Lady Eleanor, dressed in mourning black, approached Miss Marple, her face composed but her eyes heavy with fatigue. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice soft, "I find myself at a loss. Verdant Hall has been my home for decades, yet now it feels like a stranger's house. I wonder if you might advise me, should I stay, or should I let it go?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze kind but discerning. "In my village, Lady Eleanor, I once knew a woman who clung to a house filled with painful memories, thinking it her duty. It drained her spirit. A home should be a place of peace, not a burden. If Verdant Hall no longer feels like yours, perhaps it is time to seek a new path." Lady Eleanor nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "You're right, of course. Reginald's will, the second one, changes everything. The charity will benefit, and I think I shall travel, perhaps to Italy, somewhere far from these shadows." As she left, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the letters that had sparked the tragedy. Hidden in a botany book, they had revealed Sir Reginald's intention to redirect his fortune. But why had Beatrice kept them secret? And why had Dr. Vaughan, a man of such apparent restraint, resorted to murder? In her village, Miss Marple had seen secrets guarded out of fear or loyalty, and she suspected Beatrice's silence had been born of both. Roger and Sylvia Ashby were the next to approach, their luggage packed, and their expressions a mix of relief and strain. Roger, his earlier bravado softened, spoke first. "Miss Marple, I owe you an apology. I was a fool, railing against my uncle, making myself look guilty. You and Monsieur Poirot saw through it, and I'm grateful." Sylvia's hand rested lightly on his arm, her voice quieter than usual. "We've decided to start fresh, perhaps in London. This whole affair has shown us what matters. We'll be more careful with each other now." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with understanding. "In my village, I've seen couples strengthened by adversity. If they choose to learn from it, be kind to one another, and the rest will follow." As they departed, Miss Marple noted the subtle change in their demeanor: less tension, more unity. The murder had tested their marriage, but it had also revealed its resilience. Yet her mind lingered on Peter Grayson, the young clerk whose hesitations had nearly cost him dearly. She found him in the hall, his suitcase at his feet, his face shadowed by introspection. "Mr. Grayson," she said gently, "you look as though you carry a weight still. Is there something you wish to share?" Peter's eyes met hers, and for a moment he seemed on the verge of speaking. Then he shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. "You see too much, Miss Marple. I was just thinking about Beatrice. She was kind to me, gave me that book on botany. I wish I'd spoken up sooner about Dr. Vaughan. I might have saved her." Miss Marple's voice was soft but firm. "Regret is a heavy burden, Mr. Grayson, but it can also be a teacher. In my village, a young man once kept silent about a wrong, fearing he'd be blamed. He learned to trust his voice, and so will you. You did right in the end." Peter nodded, his shoulders straightening. Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll try to remember that. As he left, Mrs. Bantry bustled in, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Jane, what a week. I told you there'd be more than bridge at stake. You and that little Belgian were marvelous, positively theatrical. Will you tell me how you knew it was Vaughan? Miss Marple smiled, resuming her knitting. It was the details. Clara, the mud that didn't belong, the earring that told a story. Peter's hesitation. In my village, it's always the small things that reveal the truth. Monsieur Poirot and I, we simply listened to them. Mrs. Bantry laughed, settling beside her. You're a marvel, Jane. St. Mary Mead won't know what's hidden when we get back. Any more mysteries up your sleeve? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, Clara, there's always a mystery, if you know where to look. As the last of the guests departed, Miss Marple gazed out at the garden, where the roses were beginning to droop under the weight of recent rain. The threads of the case were tied, but life, she knew, would weave new ones. And she, with her quiet observation and unerring insight, would be ready to unravel them. Chapter 14. The quiet departure. The air at Verdant Hall was crisp and clear, the morning sun painting the manor's ivy-clad walls with a golden sheen that belied the darkness of the days just past. The guests had all but departed, their cars crunching down the gravel drive, leaving behind a stillness that felt both peaceful and hollow. Miss Jane Marple, her modest suitcase packed, stood in the hall, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. Mrs. Clara Bantry, ever the bustling companion, fussed with her own luggage, her voice bright, but tinged with the melancholy of endings. Jane, I declare, this has been an adventure for the books, Mrs. Bantry said, adjusting her hat. Murder, letters, a villainous doctorate's like something out of one of those novels you're always reading. But I suppose you're glad to be heading back to St. Mary Mead, where things are quieter. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Quieter, perhaps, Clara, but never dull. In my village, there's always a story unfolding, if one knows where to look. Verdant Hall has reminded me of that. The hall was nearly empty now, save for a few servants tidying up and Lady Eleanor, who emerged from the morning room to bid them farewell. Her face, though still pale, carried a newfound resolve, as if the unmasking of Dr. Vaughan had freed her from a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged. Miss Marple, she said, her voice steady, I cannot thank you enough. You and Monsieur Poirot brought light to a very dark moment. I shall not forget it. Miss Marple inclined her head, her voice gentle. You are most kind, Lady Eleanor. In my village, I have seen how truth, painful though it may be, can pave the way for healing. I trust you will find your path, whether here or elsewhere. Lady Eleanor's lips curved in a faint smile. I've decided to honor Reginald's second will. The charity will receive the estate, and I shall travel perhaps to Florence, where the air is warm and the past feels less heavy. Verdant Hall deserves a new chapter, and so do I. Mrs. Bantry beamed. That's the spirit. A bit of Italian sun will do you wonders, Lady Eleanor. And Jane, we must get you to the station before the train leaves us behind. As they stepped outside, the gravel crunching underfoot, Miss Marple paused to glance back at the manor. Its Georgian elegance stood unshaken, yet she sensed the ghosts of the past. Beatrice Lyle's quiet presence, Dr. Vaughan's hidden ambition, the letters that had sparked such tragedy. In her village, she had seen houses carry their stories like scars, but also like lessons. The drive to the station was short, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green hills and hedgerows. Mrs. Bantry chattered about the case, her enthusiasm undimmed. I still can't believe it was Dr. Vaughan, Jane. He seemed so respectable. How did you and Poirot know? Miss Marple's smile was soft but knowing. It was the little things. Clara. The mud that didn't belong. The earring that told a lie. Young Peter's hesitation. In my village, I once knew a man who seemed the pillar of respectability, but his eyes betrayed him. Dr. Vaughan's calm was too perfect, his alibi too precise, and the letters Beatrice's secret they were, the thread that unraveled it all. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, marveling. You're a marvel, Jane. I wager Poirot thinks so too. Will you see him again, do you think? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, Clara. Monsieur Poirot and I share a love of truth. Though our methods differ, I suspect our paths may cross when another puzzle demands it. At the station, the train's whistle pierced the air, a sharp reminder of time moving forward. Miss Marple boarded with her usual quiet grace, settling by a window with her knitting. As the train pulled away, she watched Verdant Hall fade into the distance, its secrets laid bare, its future uncertain but hopeful in her mind. She replayed the case, the statuette, heavy with intent, the mud, a clue from the shadows, the earring, a false trail, the letters, the heart of the crime. Each detail had played its part, and she, with her unassuming observation, had helped bring them to light. St. Mary Mead awaited, with its own quiet mysteries, and Miss Marple felt a familiar stirring, a readiness to listen, to watch, to find the truth in the smallest of things. As the train rattled on, she opened her knitting bag, her needles resuming their familiar rhythm. The world, she knew, was full of patterns, and she would always be there to unravel them. Chapter 15. The return to St. Mary Mead. Train to St. Mary Mead chugged steadily through the English countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing backdrop to Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes tracing the familiar patchwork of fields and hedgerows that marked the approach to her village. Mrs. Clara Bantry, seated opposite, leafed through a magazine, occasionally breaking the silence with a comment about the scandal at Verdant Hall. Jane, she said, looking up, I still can't believe we were part of such a drama. It's like something out of one of your detective novels. Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle smile. Life, Clara, is often more dramatic than any novel. In my village, I have seen quiet moments unravel into stories of great consequence. Verdant Hall was merely one such story. The events at Verdant Hall lingered in her mind, not as a puzzle to be solved for that had been done, but as a reminder of the fragility of human nature. Beatrice Lyle's death, Dr. Vaughan's betrayal, the hidden letters that had shifted the course of lives, all were threads in a tapestry she had helped to unravel. Yet, as always, it was the people, not the crime, that held her attention. Lady Eleanor's resolve to start anew, Roger and Sylvia's tentative reconciliation, Peter Grayson's quiet courage in facing his fears. Mrs. Bantry closed her magazine, her eyes bright with curiosity. Tell me, Jane, what was it about Dr. Vaughan that made you so certain? I mean, he was so composed. I'd have never suspected him. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze drifting to the passing countryside. It was the details, Clara, as it always is. In my village, I once knew a man who betrayed his guilt by the way he polished his shoes too meticulously, as if to erase something. Dr. Vaughan's calm was like that, too perfect, too controlled. The mud from the cellar, the tarnished earring, The statuette they all pointed to a mind that planned, yet panicked, and young Peter's hesitation. His fear of speaking it told me someone had frightened him. From there, it was a matter of fitting the pieces together. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, marveling. You and that Monsieur Poirot you're a pair, aren't you? I dare say he was as impressed with you as I am. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Monsieur Poirot is a man of great intellect, Clara, and a kindred spirit in the pursuit of truth. His methods are precise, logical, while mine, well, I suppose I rely on the patterns of life, the little things that people do without thinking. Together, we saw what others missed. The train slowed as St. Mary Mead came into view, its familiar spire and thatched roofs a comforting sight. Miss Marple gathered her knitting bag, her movements unhurried, her mind already turning to the quiet rhythms of home. Yet she knew that even in St. Mary Mead, secrets lurked small, perhaps, but no less significant. A misplaced word, a glance. Too long, a door left ajar, these were the clues that kept her vigilant. As they stepped onto the platform, Mrs. Bantry linked arms with her. Home at last, Jane. I suppose you'll be back to your garden and your church teas. As if nothing happened. But I'll never look at you the same way after this. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Oh, Clara, I shall be quite content with my roses and my teas. But I will keep my eyes open, as always. In my village, there's always something to see. They parted ways at the station, Mrs. Bantry heading to her own house, with promises of a gossip-filled lunch soon. Miss Marple walked the short distance to her cottage, the air sweet with the scent of late summer blooms. Inside, the familiar comforts awaited. Her armchair by the fire, her knitting basket, her view of the garden where secrets sometimes whispered in the rustle of leaves. She settled into her chair, her needles resuming their rhythm, her mind at peace but ever alert. Verdant Hall had been a chapter, a vivid one, but St. Mary Mead was her story, and she knew it held countless more. The truth, as she had told Poirot, was a garden that required tending, and Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and unerring eye, would always be its gardener.